Hello friends. Welcome to the Eastern Front channel. Today we will talk with you about the memoirs of Friedrich Paulus adjutant, Wilhelm Adam. He fought with Paulus until he was captured in 1943. These days our staff have returned to their old life, the apparatus ran full pelt. Orderly officers, telephone conversations, radio communications, orders and reports. Schmidt especially was on form. Almost daily Paulus spoke over the decimeter apparatus with Field Marshal von Manstein. I listened in to most of these conversations and took notes. They didn't agree with each other. Paulus wanted to know, what is the situation at the Soviet breakthrough point west of the Don? When can we expect the relief army to get near? Is there a comprehensive stable front at the Chur? Has the enemy offensive been checked? Will General Hallett counterattack soon? But Manstein gave only inadequate, vague answers. Paulus was angered by what he saw as the lack of orientation of the commander-in-chief of Army Group Don. How can I make decisions here when I don't know what it looks like outside, what Manstein and the Army High Command are doing and intending? I only hear the eternal hold on, which we have been doing for 4 weeks already and going to the dogs. Certainly it seems that Hoth is making hardly any progress. Parts of his 14th Panzer Corps have gone over to the defensive. Perhaps we can relieve Hoth when we break out and thrust towards him, General. The Russians would then have to fight on two sides and divide their forces. That is quite right, Adam, but until now Manstein has not allowed it. The codeword thunderclap has to be given. Until now he has not thought about it. Hitler and the Army High Command still want us to hold the city. And Manstein is shy of giving such an order, even though he knows our predicament. At the time right after the closing of the cauldron, the order to hold on was based, among other things, on the contention that an early abandonment of the city would result in the destruction of Army Group A in the Caucasus, which at any time could have become impassable because of the autumn rains and mud, as it certainly is today, also in the foothills of the Caucasus where the ground is frozen hard. Nevertheless, the ban on a breakout for us still continues. What can I do when I don't know the full situation and am not being properly informed by Manstein? These last words rang like a desperate cry for help. Paulus seemed to be about to fall apart under the overwhelming burden of responsibility. Hopefully he would keep it together, I thought, as I left the room. Late in the evening on the December 17th Army Group Dawn informed us that it had made contact with Hoth's army and had crossed the Axii near Generalowski. Hopefully Hoth will now gain some ground, General, I said when I went to tell him. It would be wishing a lot in our interest. Had this division gone into the attack 5 days earlier, success in my opinion would have been assured. Meanwhile the Red Army High Command has had sufficient time to reinforce its defensive forces. Let us wait and see what happens tomorrow and the day after. How this waiting tore at the nerves, how it paralyzed. Even the agile Major, General Schmidt, showed signs of it. When I suggested pulling out soldiers and officers from the staff and rear services as infantry, he agreed but wanted to wait until the decision on our breakout had succeeded. Was the enemy also hesitating? It was hardly detectable. He was active, if only in the form of a sewing machine which circled over our headquarters and dropped bombs. One of them apparently struck quite close to our headquarters dugout. The ground shook and windows shattered. How long would the enemy hold back his clenched fist? When and how would our waiting end? On the morning of the December 18th, the airport commandant rang from Potomnik. Major Eisman has just landed. He is asking for a vehicle to pick him up. Immediately a car from the standby pool was sent off. 1 hour later the major reported to General Paulus, and then to Major General Schmidt. Thereafter followed a detailed discussion in Schmidt's office involving both generals and the representative of the Army Group. I got to know Eisman during our lunch together. My first impression was that he was still a very young officer, though clever and adroit. What task had brought him here? No word was spoken about it during the meal. I only heard that he had orders to fly back to the headquarters of Army Group Don at Novicherkassk that same day. A flying visit, I thought. After the meal Eisman wanted to talk with Elchlep and Konoski. As usual, I escorted Paulus to his bunker. The commander-in-chief took me into his office. Go ahead and ask what the short visit by the young general staff officer was about, Adam. Manstein had tasked him with briefing us on the overall situation. The Hoth army has come up against a very strong, overwhelming enemy. It is making hardly any progress. In the opinion of Army Group Dawn, it is questionable whether Hoth can break through the encircling ring with the forces available to him. Manstein also considers an increase in air supply as out of the question, therefore the 6th Army should prepare itself for a counterattack. I think, General, that we have made all the preparations necessary for it. When should we start? The most serious thing seems to me to be our fuel situation. Our few tanks can only go just 30 kilometers with the supplies available. Hoth's spearheads are, however, more than 50 kilometers away from us. Has the Army Group at least arranged for fuel and ammunition to be flown in? Does Manstein know the fighting condition of our soldiers? Does he know that most are half starving? You say to yourself that our soldiers have been weakened and most of our divisions stand about 40 kilometers from the proposed breakthrough points. Think of the fate of the 94th Infantry Division that Seydlitz withdrew from the Northern Front on the November 23rd. Exactly so will the enemy drive into our emaciated, decimated troops and defeat them. No, under the present circumstances, giving the order to break out would be irresponsible. I must be certain that the outside encirclement will be broken or that Hoth is so close that we can meet up in one day. If anyone can make the preparations for the breakout possible, it is Manstein. Until now he has kept avoiding this decisive question. I have explained my position openly to Eisman and asked him to brief Manstein just as openly. The situation in the cauldron has basically changed in the last weeks. Our army is now very limited in its fighting capacity. I don't understand, given our catastrophic situation, why Manstein only sent a major instead of flying into the cauldron himself or at least sending his chief of staff. Our superiors, General, need to avoid a further worsening of the situation. You are absolutely right. Army Group Headquarters must know what has to be done. Manstein knows the situation within and outside the cauldron. He knows what forces are still coming. Apparently, the Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Dawn is not ready to go against Hitler of his own accord. I have spoken much about the cauldron in my personal talks with Manstein. Now he must lay his cards on the table. Schmidt too cannot understand Manstein handling the 6th Army on the brink this way, sending us his youngest staff officer. Now we have to wait yet again. Konoski gave Eisman a written report on the overwhelming lack of food supplies and medical equipment. It must be clear to Manstein that the remains of the 6th Army will go miserably to the ground, if not now, then at the last minute. All the forces from outside are concentrated on its relief. For 10,000 even this massive assistance operation is coming too late. Despite everything, I have little hope that Manstein will issue the order to give up Stalingrad. You will see, Adam, that whatever happens here I will be the one made responsible for it. Who will take into consideration that my hands were tied to their orders by superior headquarters? Who will notice that I was hampered by lack of information about the situation outside the cauldron? What could I say to our almost baffled general, who day and night pondered how he could lead the army out of this hopeless situation? I could find no words. It was obvious to me that no one would take the main responsibility for the suffering of the 6th Army, except those who had sent him with his soldiers into this abyss and then betrayed him. But who were these people, Hitler, Keitel, Jodl and the Army High Command? What blame is attached to Wakes or Manstein? Were there more guilty ones? I could find no clear answer at that time. On the evening of the December 18th, the departmental heads met in Paulus's bunker as usual. Schmidt's short report about Operation Hoth stated only what Eisman had said that morning. The 17th and the 6th Panzer Divisions were practically stuck fast. Finally we shared our meager supper. The atmosphere was depressed. Then an orderly entered and asked Paulus to go to the telephone for Field Marshal von Manstein. We listened attentively. Was this the saving order arriving? Elschlepp said, that worked really quickly this time. Nobody took his eyes off the door. Minutes passed, but Paulus did not come. Slowly the old skepticism returned. If the conversation was really about the breakout, Paulus would certainly have called Schmidt. Then, finally, the commander-in-chief came back into the room. That was certainly unusual. It could have nothing to do with the order for the breakout. While I was still reflecting, Paulus came up to my chair. I have for you all, gentlemen, a happy announcement to make. Today our first adjutant, Colonel Adam, for his participation in the construction and defense of the Chur front, his personal engagement in this, and his bravery, has been awarded the Knight's Cross. With these words, Paulus handed me the high decoration that Cupper had brought. I was so astonished that I remained dumb at his congratulations. All rushed towards me and shook my hand. For a brief moment misery and death were forgotten. A great pleasure overwhelmed me, sincere pride in this decoration, especially since the commander-in-chief emphasized that it was the first time in the German history of war that an army adjutant had been decorated with the highest award. But this happy feeling vanished before it could really spread. Into the celebration cup fell the bitter remembrance of the heavy casualties on the lower chair, of the many comrades who had then and since lost their lives. At the end of November, the commander-in-chief of the army group had ordered us to keep the line of retreat open for the 6th Army. It was for this reason that the soldiers who had fled to Nizhny Cherskaya were deployed. Helping their sorely pressed comrades in the cauldron was also my duty then. That was why we had prepared for the fiercest action. But the fact that the lives of the bloody victims had been thrown away did not change my Knight's Cross that had come after it. More than the sad review of the previous 4 weeks, the horrible present prevented this order from going to my head. We staff officers were still sitting together when Schmidt brought some fresh news on the evening of the December 18th. The Soviet army was pursuing the attack begun on the December 16th with growing success. The whole of the Italian 8th Army's front had been breached. Its units were in wild flight, their positions abandoned as they set off for the west. Thus, the Chief of Staff concluded his briefing. On the left flank of the Upper fighting German units and emergency units are being torn wide apart. The breach is already 45 kilometers wide. Apparently Army Group has had to withdraw the whole of the left wing. What would happen to Hoff's offensive now? Would his Panzer Army be strong enough to launch an attack and quickly make contact with us? We stood together with Paulus and Schmidt in front of the situation map. It was incomprehensible. We knew little about which of our own troops were at the breakthrough points, what their fighting strength was, exactly how their positions ran. We knew absolutely nothing about the strength of the enemy and his main direction of thrust. The commander-in-chief listened for a few minutes to our conjectures and then said, "Everything depends on what reserves the Army High Command can and will deploy. We cannot judge this from inside the cauldron. May the optimists be right." Worries upon worries, I went out into the clear frosty night with the IA and we walked together between our bunkers several times. It is all incomprehensible to me. Elschlepp, if I am not wrong, was the German 29th Corps not deployed with the Italian 8th Army? It seems as if the German units have disengaged too. Supposedly, apparently they have been scattered by the fleeing Italians. When I consider, Elschlepp, how we have rushed from victory to victory since 1940, now defeat follows defeat, there must be a reason for it. I see the main reason being our immovable, stubborn command. We react too seldom and then only reluctantly to the enemy's measures, underestimating him in unanswerable ways. The more I think about it, the more oppressed I am with the thought that we too in the headquarters of the 6th Army have handled things inflexibly and narrow-mindedly in decisive moments. That is naturally easy to say today, looking back. Neither Paulus nor Schmidt, nor the commanding generals, with the exception of Seydlitz, nor you or I in the days before the November 20th were prepared to go against the orders of Hitler and the Army High Command to break through to the southwest and unclasp ourselves from the threatening enclosure. There was still enough time then. We would have saved thousands of lives that have since been lost in a battle that on our side lacked ammunition, fuel and rations, which must be described less as a battle than as an agony. Will not all of us who occupy leading appointments in the 6th Army be allocated a portion of the blame at some time? You know my standpoint in this situation, Adam. We are soldiers and we have to obey. That also applies even if we cannot understand the correctness of an order and perhaps ourselves have to bite the dust. Every soldier has to take this into account, but professional officers like you and me especially so. Not every day is evening now, the leaf can still turn in our favor. We have known each other long enough, I said, to know that neither of us is a coward. If it falls to our lot, we must reckon on having to go to the front any minute. I agree with you completely that it goes with our profession, but firstly, it does not apply just to the two of us, but to about 270,000 soldiers. Secondly, I would like to repeat that what is being played out with our units is hardly fighting, but must better be described as perishing. You know that as well as I do. Who bears the responsibility for this silent dying? Only Hitler and the Army High Command, only Manstein and his staff. Are we completely free of blame? Were we as military leaders completely correct in our responsibility towards the troops? Have we not passed the point in time, without action, at which our officers' honor should have been offered to handle matters in the interest of our soldiers ourselves? Please understand me correctly, Elchlep, I am far from rising up to act as a judge of the army leadership, or making myself a martyr. I myself am not clear about these questions. But I also cannot simply brush them aside. They are there and they bore ever more painfully within me as our situation deteriorates. Your optimism is honorable, old chap. I too am considered an optimist among our comrades. However, today's report about the destruction of the Italian Eighth Army has now destroyed my confidence. Let the musing be, Adam, it does not help, we are unable to review the whole situation for the moment. Certainly the southern front is under threat, but the Army High Command will soon get a grip of the situation. A few more days and we can shake hands with the Hoth Army, the mess will be at an end. We will be operating on an open battlefield. Today our divisions on the southern front have reported that the thunder of Hoth's guns can already be heard. We were now standing in front of my new dugout, sparks were coming out of the small chimney. Apparently my officer assistant was clever at heating. When I had set off that afternoon, the ice on the walls was shining. Have you visited my villa, Elchlep? I have had not the opportunity as yet. Come in for half an hour. I still have a bottle of cognac as iron rations in my box. A good slug is helpful against brooding and freezing. The colonel followed me down the 5 steps to the entrance to my bunker. I opened the door. In front of the stove my lieutenant was squatting and stoking the fire. In contrast to conditions outside, the room was pleasantly warm, the walls seemed to have defrosted. While Elchlep was exchanging a few words with my lieutenant, I extracted the bottle of Martel brandy from my box and uncorked it. I found a glass for Elchlep, and Wehrmacht issue aluminum beakers for the other 2. The chairs were brought closer to the stove. Here's to a good result to the battle, Elchlep raised his glass. We drank with him, with a little jerk we tipped the brandy down our throats. What a treat! And if it does not go well, Elchlep, what then, and if the breach through the Italians can't be sealed? Must not the relief army be pulled back as quickly as possible if it is not to be surrounded? Would our defeat then not finally be sealed? You just can't leave the gloom alone today. What is it? Defeat means death or imprisonment, or to be exact, only death. Imprisonment is the same as death. According to the newspapers and the broadcasts to the soldiers, you could be right. But I was so convinced, quite honestly, about the shot in the back of the neck that the Reds give to everyone, that living in captivity was never advisable. That could be, Adam, I will never go into captivity. According to your opinion, the whole army must be in a hopeless position if it no longer has the least prospect of a breakthrough, only the option to let oneself be shot down by the enemy. How does your thesis differ from the appeal for mass suicide? I too personally fear captivity, but can we take the responsibility for hundreds of thousands being victims of perhaps unfounded anxiety? That is senseless. In my opinion, the battle must go on as long as there is any possibility of relief. Otherwise, the question arises of the last vestiges of hope having vanished. My dear Adam, you can be assured that I would never agree to a breaking off of the fighting, when that would be tantamount to captivity. And imprisonment is death. How will you avoid captivity, Elchlep? I would ask Paulus to permit me to go to the front as a combatant. There I would sell my life as dearly as possible. That is nonsense, Elchlep, nothing but suicide. You have your wife and your children. It is not dishonorable for a commander to end a battle that has demanded the useless expenditure of the lives of tens of thousands of men. I think that you should go over all of this once more. The IA stood up. There is nothing for me to revise, but I hope that all will come out well. With these words he said goodbye to me and my speechless lieutenant sitting there.